Welcome back to another episode of Relatively Damaged Live. I'm Angela.
And I'm Kat.
Hey, we're going to get this down one of these days perfectly, and we're going to be like, whoa. The live shows are currently streamed Mondays to Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and many other channels where you can find us. Please remember to follow and subscribe and share with your friends. On the Monday segment of the show, Kat and I talk about topics we find interesting for about 30 minutes. Today's topic: how do you know you are living a discussion on tortured souls? We have a special guest. Victoria J. Hyla, otherwise known as Victoria Hyla Maldonado, has been writing all her life and has worked professionally as a writer and editor for more than 20 years. She's the author of the substantive women's fiction Hearts Drawn Wild trilogy, In Death We Part, Running in the Mist, Awaken in Elysian Fields, as well as several anthology published short stories in several genres, including romance, crime thriller, horror, can I say this word today? Post-apocalyptic. There we go. Apocalyptic. And drama. She's also the owner of Victorious Editing Services, the author of several children's books, and manager of Author Spots, an online marketplace for authors to sell more books and make more money. She lives in the western suburbs of Chicago with her husband and children and is working on a new romance series, as well as several other short stories and more children's books. Learn more about her books, editing and consulting services, and more at victoriajhyla.com. Today, we have Victoria here to talk about... Hello, Victoria! And she's actually here to talk about a book that she helped compile and edit, which is The Evidence I Have Lived, The Complete Writings of Lisa F. Gullo. Did I say her name? I said her last name right.
Yeah, Gullo. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. And you're on the show. We're primarily talking this month. I mean, we've really focused on suicide, as it was Suicide Awareness Month. Mm-hmm. And so tell us a little bit about Lisa and her story.
Yeah, I mean, Lisa, I knew her through a church we both used to attend. And I mean, I met her pretty late in her journey, but she was one of my best volunteers for a course that I led called Alpha. And, but she had hemiplegic migraines, which is a migraine, but it makes half your body go paralyzed for a period of time. And she had seizures, and then couple that with depression and anxiety and low self-esteem and just all the factors that go into it, and not wanting to be a burden on the other people. So she was this very complex person, but she basically hid most of it from the rest of us. So she would come and she'd crack jokes, she'd deliver on food, she'd build other people up, she'd tell me to calm down, which is what I need a lot. And but like, she was this powerhouse of this energy and this beacon of light by the time that I knew her. But yet inside she was dying and she was struggling. And so, she passed from suicide on December 30th in 2018. And from that, and she'd attempted it 4 other times previous to that. But like, when she died, I knew she wrote some poetry, but I'd never really seen much of it. So I asked her husband if I could see what she had and do something with it. And then this honkin' tome of poetry came about. It took me the better part of 2020 to compile it and put it together. But I felt it was important because she hated being a burden on everyone, but she also did not know her self-worth. And she really wanted to make a mark on the world and in her family. And so this is my gift to her. And I'm just happy that I was in the right place at the right time to make it happen with the right skill set. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I am just wondering, going through all of her her poetry and her journals and her writing, what was that like emotionally for you? What did that feel like?
Yeah, that was very challenging. That's why I did it over the course of 3 months, the intensive process. But I had to go through it repeatedly. I mean, even in the first round, I just had to extricate them from files. So I was typing them out. So I was living through her traumas. And then, I mean, I had to understand how it should be organized. And luckily, she had dated most of her poems. So it was fairly straightforward in that sense. But yeah, no, I went through it emotionally with her, and it broke my heart several times. I mean, not every poem was like a heartbreaker, but there were several poems and several times where I'm just like, oh God, Lisa, if I had just known, we could have had a conversation and I could have tried to build you up more, or other people could have. If you had shared this with people, we might have been able to do something. But I mean, we can't put that onus on ourselves, but still, you know, that those thoughts go through your head. So it was 3 months of deep emotional trauma going through it with her. But it was well worth it. I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
That leads me to a question. Okay, now that you look back and knowing what you know now, are there any signs that you might have seen that you wish you would have recognized, or was she very adept at cloaking that part of herself?
She was adept at cloaking it, but there were signs. She also talked a big positive game. So at like toward the end, in mid 2018, we all thought she was getting better because she had been going to counseling. She had been so much more upbeat in person. She was going to more events. She was able to do more things. Her when she tried suicide the first time, they intubated her and created a hole in her throat. So she had a trach tube, but that had finally healed up, you know. And so her outlook was so positive, but and all of us were so busy, so we didn't really notice it because she was so positive. But looking back, you could see, I mean, I could see, yeah, there were some struggles and there were some things she was going through that she shared with very few people. um and, you know, I would send her Bible passages that, you know, made me think of her for encouragement. But it was, I don't feel like I did enough, but I mean, it wasn't mine to really do. But no, there were signs, but only in retrospect. That hindsight 2020 thing, man, that is clear. But, yeah.
I know, Kat, you've got a few questions.
Yeah,
so go for it.
That was one of them. So, in editing the book of her poetry, what did you learn about Lisa's struggles that you think may help someone else experiencing their own struggles?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that her entire life was not gloom and doom and depression. A lot of her poetry was about nature. She had this passionate love for being outside and being in nature. She loved rain, she loved leaves, she loved animals. I mean, there are so many facets to people's personalities that we tend to forget when we're like, oh, they committed suicide, that tells me blah 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 about them. But she was so amazingly just diverse in her interests. And um and it and because she dated a lot of her poems, you could see the progression of her mental illness, and it didn't all stem from one thing. I mean, there were some stuff that happened early in her life. She was sexually abused as a child, and she was told she would never amount to anything, you know, that kind of emotional abuse as well. But then there's this huge gap where she was fine, right? But then I could see her poetry when she's coming to faith. So, I mean, it wasn't just, oh, she wanted to commit suicide and therefore she did. It's not simple. And I think reading through her poetry in the way that it's presented as her journal, people can see that she really tried to get past it. And just, she couldn't get past it in a way that was self-sustaining, I guess. But yeah, I learned that, I mean, she really did try. Yeah, that was kind of the best thing I took back.
You know, So there's a couple more questions that I have, and one you've kind of touched on right now, but I want to actually ask that as the last question. So there is a saying, we're only as sick as our secrets. Do you agree with this in light of Lisa's experience? If so, can you reflect on that?
I think in a little bit. I know I can tell that from my own life as well. When you hold it all in and you keep it back, it tends to be like a cancer or like a poison that you just hold in. And I can feel that coming through in her poetry a lot. Because I mean, half of her poetry is talking about like, I only write this for me. No one will see it because no one cares, and I don't want to be a burden. That's the kind of themes that go around it. And that, as much as anything else she was going through, I think created some of the poison in her thoughts. She, and like you were saying, I mean, it really, it kept her from fully realizing that people really did care to be around her and to help her and to support her, and she wasn't a burden and that kind of thing. But yeah, but she, because she kept it to herself, I think that did a lot of damage by itself. And I know that's true in my life as well, so I can get on that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think too, on some level, from society, the perspective of society, it's not cool to share that burden. I think that social media doesn't really help in that. I think it's trying, but there's still this level of toxic positivity. Oh, you feel this way? Well, just breathe right, or just do this, or just do that, instead of, oh, let me sit with you in that. Let me be with you in that pain. And I think because of that, we've lost that deeper connection to the full human experience of all of your pain and suffering is welcome, and your joy, all of it. Yeah. And
yeah,
I'm not
I
sure.
experienced that in my own life as well, where like you hold it in and it doesn't get better until you start sharing, but society doesn't really want to hear how your day is. That kind of thing. Yeah.
And I think it's important to bring in this another reminder. If you are feeling suicidal or you know someone who is, please call in the US 988.
Yeah.
That is the National Suicide Hotline, where you can get help, where people will listen to you, or as the graphic says, or find a professional. Counseling does help tremendously with that, in order to talk those things out, because there are people who care out there.
Well, and I'm just going to say too, finding a counselor that you connect with, a clinician that you can feel heard. Sometimes, a lot of times actually, when I worked in the medical field, I worked specifically in pediatrics, and a lot of times parents would not feel heard or like they were connecting, and they would think that if they switched clinicians that they were going to be judged. And the reality of it was that really wasn't true, number one. And number two, if you're not feeling heard, there's going to be a gap in that communication anyway, which means you may not fully be understanding them, and they are not fully understanding you, which means things might be missed. So please, if you are not comfortable with someone, keep looking for someone you can connect with where you feel heard, because I think that is super, super important.
Agreed. Shall we go ahead and read your favorite poem in the book now? Would that be a good time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. There's one poem that always stuck out to me, and it deals with the entire theme of what she's going through. It was written in December 2017, and it's kind of the theme that gave me the title for it as well, and it's called When. So I'll go ahead and read it. Okay, so she says, when do you know if your life has meaning? If anyone noticed that you were even breathing? When do you know if your life was worth it? If anyone noticed that you didn't quit? When do you know if your life touched another? If anyone noticed how much you were a lover? When do you know if your life came true? If anyone noticed you did what you were meant to? When do you know if your life was good enough? If anyone noticed that you grew up? When do you know if your life gave love? If anyone noticed how much they were thought of? When do you know if your life ceased? if anyone noticed, you were finally at peace. So it's a whole poem of questions, and she never uses a question mark. And I always thought that was very interesting. But yeah, so she was always wondering, like, when am I going to get better and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of ties all the themes together. So,
And
Yeah.
I love that poem. And what I noticed, we talked a little bit of this, you talked about it in the introduction, and then we had a little discussion about this. At the bottom of that page, you put, "Where is the evidence that I have lived?"
Mm-hmm.
And why don't you explain what those little sayings were and how you match them up with the poetry?
Yeah, so I'll show a visual here, but yeah, throughout the book, there's these little pulled out quotes, and they are not necessarily what's in the poem. Sorry, it's a big glare in my world here.
Yeah, it's not working.
Weird
You're
glare.
weird. I'm not.
Oh yeah. But so for one of the files that I found, and I got a huge thumb drive from her husband, as well as paper, a folder of papers. I found a file of all these tiny little, like 1 and 2 line snippets and thoughts. They weren't big enough to be poems on their own, and it would just be weird to have like 1 line on a page as a poem. So I sat with it a while. I'm like, do I use those? Do I not use those? But then I realized that they were on the themes she had been writing on. And so this is one of my editorial decisions, and I hope it was the right decision. I think it was, to place those with poems that had a similar theme. So throughout the book, you'll see those little tagline snippets, and it just enhances the meaning of the poem that's on that page. And we also were able to put a bunch of artwork in there as well. And every piece of artwork was donated by artists and photographers. And I just made a decision where to put them throughout the book, because Lisa in her files had included drawings and clip art and photographs and things like that. And I was able to use a lot of her art as well. But like some of them, there were copyright issues, they were quality issues. And so I reached out on social media to artists and photographers, and I got maybe 20 artists to just donate their work to the cause. And it just enhanced the themes and what we were trying to achieve. So yeah.
That's awesome. What great love.
Beautiful. Yeah. Because I saw that at the end, and when I first read the poem, because when you and I had discussed it, you said this is my favorite, and you had marked that, and I read it, and it was just struck me with the strength of that, and the poems are all like that, but of course they're much more than that too. Like you said, they it wasn't just about gloom and doom, it was about living. And but that you put that quote in there that really struck me, and I know that you incorporated that in the title, but that kind of goes to an existential question that we all have at one time. I mean, I'll go through these thoughts, and sometimes I will say, well, nobody really cares what I have to say, and well, but this is the internal dialogue that we have with ourselves sometimes.
Oh, I have it too.
Yeah. And so so when you say that, where's the evidence that I've lived? And when I'm thinking positively, when I think I'm in my right mind, I mean, I see that as with who I loved and how I loved, really. The thing, and this is, in a sense, yes, it is a struggle, but there's also so much love in that book of poetry. And I'll be honest, it's a big book, and I haven't made it all the way through yet, but I write a bit of it, and yeah,
there's some darkness, but there's also some really brilliant points of light too. So
and I think a lot of times, at least from my perspective as a writer of poetry, that's what I'm looking for is that life. And I wish you could have seen that. Like I see the evidence in all of the pain and all of the suffering and all of the joy and all of the beauty. But I couldn't. I am sad that she did commit suicide, in that what an amazing connection she had to describing emotion on such a level that was so absolutely relatable, from so many different perspectives. Like, I totally get that poem from my perspective, which brings her back to life, like it would not exist without her.
Yeah, and one of the key things about her poetry is that she honestly never intended on sharing this with anyone. So she wrote it for herself. She wrote it to work through her own pain and her own confusions and her own doubts and joys and all that stuff. I mean, before she passed, I think I saw 3 of her poems, and they were all positive and faith-based and joyous about her journey toward, a relationship with Christ. And I never saw any of the dark stuff. She maybe offhandedly mentioned that she wrote poetry, but beyond that, like, she didn't share. And so because like, honestly, when I asked her husband for the poetry, I'm thinking I'm going to get 20, 25, 30, 40 poems. No, I got 500 poems, and some long, some short, most of them are to a page, but some of them go over to a second page. And I mean, and they were all from very dark and shocking to beautiful and uplifting. And she has like poems dedicated to her children in this anthology and to her husband. And yeah, I mean, it's overwhelming, but I'm so happy to be a part of it. So
yeah. That's the thing is that it struck me that she wrote this for herself, and it's like that, almost that inner dialogue that we all have with ourselves. And I think by presenting it like this, that's what makes it so accessible, because it's so relatable. We all have that inner dialogue to various extents.
She just put it into words, and ultimately hers didn't allow her to get through it. But yeah, she was strong. She was stronger than she thought she was. So it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just one other poem I'd like to share if there's time.
Yeah, we do definitely have time.
Yeah, it's one of the final ones. It's actually the final one in the book, and I did that on purpose. And it wasn't dated, so I'm not exactly sure when she wrote it, but it's in the second section of the book is all in themes, because she dated maybe like 80%, 85% of her poetry, but then there was a handful that didn't have any dates on them, so I wasn't sure where to put them. But this one could have been her last one. It might not be, but I put it at the bottom because it is, or at the back, because it is called The End. And it really goes through a lot of her struggling. So if you'll indulge me, I will go through that. All right. It's called The End. Have you ever felt the pain where all the happiness is drowned by all the stress, and you wish for the end? Have you ever been broken where hope is just a token, the tears are endless, and you wish for the end? Have you ever felt all alone, even though a few do care? Life is still more than you can bear, and you wish for the end. Have you ever known what it's like to want to leave behind this life, knowing no one will understand, even if you write it with your own hand, and you wish for the end? Have you ever wanted to know peace, to laugh out loud with ease, to heal your wounded heart, and you wish for the end? Have you ever believed in me? It's my own strength I cannot see, blind to pleasure that can mend, and you wish for the end. Have you ever felt guilty for even feeling the pain, for causing all the strain, but you still wish for the end? Have you ever felt so bad that you just had to cut to see your own blood and let your pain out as you wish for the end? Have you ever longed for an answer to why you are this way, hurting inside every day, and you always wish for the end? That is her pain. So
yeah.
Oh, and I'm so glad you chose that one. I was going to suggest it, but I actually wanted to hear which one struck you, and it's funny that struck both of us. Yeah. And yeah, go ahead, Angela.
I was just going to say, I think it's yes, I've been there. And I think a lot of people get there, they just don't talk about it. It's like that thought that pops up, and then nobody wants, I talk about this a little bit, is like when you say, oh my gosh, I've had that thought, like some people really panic and they forget to be loving in that moment and just talk. Sometimes all you need to do is talk it out. And I know with those of us in the chronic pain community and other chronic illnesses and things like that, that's normal to wonder. It's normal to wonder if it will end or if it will go. And at least, for me, I learned that everything comes in waves, and sometimes I just need to make it through the wave. And I think that I'm so grateful for your ability to put her words into this book, to share that so that people really know that they are not alone, and that I'm here to say, yeah, me too, without, not the Me Too movement, but yeah, I've been there too. Not that I haven't been there too, but
Yeah. Yeah. I think we can all relate to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I do have one more question, and it's being that this comes towards the end of our talk. So it's so clear from her poetry that Lisa and anyone who commits suicide not be defined by their last act. Having edited this book and getting to know her in a more intimate way, what else, or what's the final thing that you could tell us about Lisa that we should really know about? That you haven't, maybe something you haven't said yet.
Yeah,
You said a lot.
I said a lot, but no, she was honestly a beautiful soul that was struggling this impossible struggle, and it's something, she had so much against her. I mean, from the migraines that made her paralyzed to the seizures that made her stop being able to work, and then the mental and emotional and physical abuse. I mean, it's just everything was stacked against her. But I mean, knowing her the way I knew her, she was a positive person. I mean, it's weird because it's such a dichotomy. Like, you see what's in here, but it's like she didn't want us to see that. And but in her poetry, like I said, not everything is doom and gloom, and not everything is, I'm thinking about suicide. I mean, there's a few poems in here when she got baptized, there's a poem, and it just shows her joy. And she had a real and true visceral experience and encounter with Jesus Christ after her first suicide attempt. But you should not be defined by the final act. And because I put this together, anyone who knew her and even has the inkling of, oh, well, she committed suicide because of blah, blah, blah. No, you got to learn the full person. And I think the joy of putting together this book, I mean, it was not a joy putting it together because of the emotional, toil that it took on me. But I am happy that you can see the rounded person that she was in all of the different kinds of poetry that's in here, and in some of her artwork too, and how she saw herself, and saw others and wanted to contribute to life. And so, yeah, I mean, absolutely, you shouldn't be defined by the one act, because every person is a full person. So
yeah. Oh, thank you so much for coming on the show today. What a beautiful conversation. Yeah. So you can find Victoria on Author Spots, and you can also find her at Victoria J. Hyla, VictoriaJHyla.com. Excuse me. I almost said the other last name. But if you have a chance, check out some of her books. Get this book. Now the proceeds, from this book all go to the family, right?
Yeah. Because now that I've paid back printing costs long ago, so every penny that is spent on copies of this book, whether it's ebook or hard copy, every cent of it goes back to her family, because she had crushing medical bills and debt, and she has 2 kids who are in college now. And so every time I make a sale, I get super joyous because I can send money to her husband, and then he just gives me a winky face back, but he's like, thanks. He was in tears when I delivered the books to him, because it was something tangible he could take into the future. And but yeah, no, but all the proceeds, I see none of the money at all. So
yeah, well, you see it for a brief moment.
Oh, I see it go in and out. I see the digital trail.
Exactly. Oh, thank you so much for being
Thank
on
you
the
so
show
much.
Victoria. Victoria J. Hyla, I'm going to say, but let's see. I'm Angela, and this is Kat, and we're just so grateful. If you enjoy the show, please hit subscribe, share with your friends, all of that great stuff, and we shall see you back here next week. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.